My name's Stephen Kostanski, and I'm a filmmaker from Toronto, Canada. And my movie is called PG Psycho Goreman, which is about two kids who dig up a monster in their backyard and go on crazy adventures. This The Void is kind of the anomaly in my filmography, where it's way more horror, way more straight horror film. And that's because it was a collaboration with Jeremy Gillespie. And so we set out to specifically make a movie that was a little more about building dread and tension and making a scary film. But while I do like those kinds of movies, I also love more like fun, upbeat movies. My movie that I made before The Void was Manborg, which I think is way more in the style and tone of PG. And so the financiers of PG specifically requested, like, they wanted to make something, they wanted to collaborate on a project with me that was more in the vein of Manborg and less so much The Void. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm interested in making all different types of movies for sure, but this kind of fun tone is more like fun kids movie tone is the most true to my personality, I would say. It comes very easily to me because I grew up, on Saturday morning cartoons and video games and silly monster movies and anime and stuff. So I just think that's more where my brain is at most of the time. And so, yeah, PG was just another excuse to indulge in all of those childhood fantasies of having a monster for a best friend and kind of all the crazy stuff that would happen with it. Not to say that The Void isn't entertaining as a horror movie, but PG, I think, is maybe a little more accessible to a broader audience. So that's just one of the types of movies that I like making. So maybe I'll make a horror movie again, or maybe I'll make another fun movie. I don't know. We'll see. I'm drawing a little bit from personal experience with that. I mean, I've always had a lot of like strong women in my life, and so I like the idea of the sister being the dominant one in the pairing. I think it just seemed like a very interesting idea to have the younger sibling be the one that's in charge and the older one being a little more submissive and a little more kind of taking a back seat, because I think that's kind of flipping tropes, like in ET it's like Elliot is kind of the one in charge, and so it's kind of like, well, what if, like, the Drew Barrymore was really the one steering that ship and not him, right? So I hope that analogy works. But with PG, I just like the idea of kind of flipping that trope on its head and having like the image of a little girl being the dominant one was funny to me, and funny, but also like true to life, because I was drawing on some experiences that I had at the time with kids, and like a daughter of one of my coworkers back in Toronto has a very big personality, and I thought it was funny how much she like would command a conversation. And so I thought, like, well, why have I not seen that in a movie? Like having like a little girl kind of like steer the ship. And so that was the initial inspiration for Mimi, and it just kind of grew out of that. And I also thought the idea of her being like, yes, dominant, but also like kind of abusive as well was an interesting dynamic. My love of practical effects is really just comes from my love of monsters and fantasy and sci-fi and horror as a kid growing up. I mean, like most guys and girls my age, like, I was a Star Wars kid. My earliest memory is, or one of my earliest memories is my dad showing me Empire Strikes Back on VHS, like showing me physically the case for it at the video store and being so like enthralled by the painted cover. But then also, like, another early childhood memory is me going to rent Terminator 2 with my family and looking at the box and looking at the endoskeleton on the back of the box and just being totally enamored with this like killer robot with red eyes and thinking like I'm like scared, but it's like an enticing kind of fear where it's like like as a kid you look at that kind of stuff and you go like that is grown up stuff. That is like that's what adult life is like killer robots and like ninjas and monsters. And I kind of like aspired to exist in that world and not be scared of it anymore. And so it was when my parents bought me Army of Darkness on VHS one Christmas. And it was back when VHS movies were on the way out and DVDs were starting to come in. So VHS tapes would have bonus features at the end. So you'd watch the movie and then afterwards there'd be like the making of or whatever. Whereas on a DVD, you'd go and you'd select it in the menu, but on VHS, it would just play everything at the end. I'd always had the image of a monster sitting at a drum set in my brain and thought like there needs to be a scenario where that fits somewhere because it's super funny and weird. And so it was after I'd made Leprechaun Returns, I was taking a break and just watching movies at home and trying to recuperate. And I bought that Blu-ray of Rawhead Rex, which I'd never seen, but it's one of those movies that as a kid I'd always seen the VHS box at the video store. And I was like, this Blu-ray has a beautiful cover. I'm going to buy it. We'll see what this movie is. And I mean, I don't want to upset the horror fans out there, but like, I don't think it's a very good movie. It's pretty slow, kind of hard to watch. So I was bored and I'm just watching this movie bored and thinking like, what would I do in this scenario? Because the core concept of this like ancient being that's resurrected is great. And that's a great start. And I was like, well, like, what would I do to make this interesting? And that's when I started kind of merging that idea with a more ET concept of like, well, yeah, there's this evil monster that's always evil and is like the purest of evil, but he makes friends with little kids and they go on adventures. And so that was like the seed of the idea initially.